there's a certain kedusha that we have to be noheg on Kisvei Kodesh. What is the halacha with microfilm? Kisvei Kodesh written so small that without a microscope you cannot read the words. Does it have kedusha or it does not have kedusha? In Sefer Piskei Tshuva, Siman Chov Beis, paskins that such a Kisvei Kodesh that you cannot read with your eyes unless you use a microscope has no din kedushas Kisvei Kodesh. And in Sefer Shalshen Tshuvas Even Yekoro also paskins like that. Such a small ksav has no din kedushas Kisvei Kodesh. And he wants to bring a raya from treifas. The halacha is that if a behemoth has a hole in the heart or in the lungs, it is a treifa and you may not eat it. What happens if that hole is so small that you can only see the hole through a microscope? Is it a treifa? Of course not. That's not considered a hole. The same thing over here. A ksav that you can only see through a microscope is not considered a ksav. But in Sefer Yabia Omer disputes this raya, because the reason why a hole in a behemoth makes it a treifa is because treifa eino chayo, a behemoth with a hole cannot live. But a microscopic hole, it's not a problem. Entire skin and organ of a person is full of microscopic holes. The kovin that has not nira l'einayim is not considered the kovin legabe treifa. But the raya is from shrotzim. If you have a sheretz, which is so small that you can only see through a microscope, it's not considered a sheretz. If you look at water and you find all type of organisms, it's not considered a sheretz. So the same thing is with Kisvei Kodesh or a Tanakh, printed so small that you can only see through a microscope, has no kedushas Kisvei Kodesh. But they bring a raya from a Gemara Masechta Gittin Tav Yutes Amud Beis. If somebody writes a get with invisible ink, like with milk, and afterwards you hit the paper or the cloth and the letters become visible, it's a kosher get. So you see from here that even if you have a tachbula to be able to read it, is considered a ksav. So maybe over here also, since you can read it through a microscope, it's considered a ksav. But you can say over there the ksav is big enough, but it's missing an ingredient to be able to see it. Over here, the ksav is so small that you can't read it unless you have a special microscope. That's not a tachbula. Everybody brings the psak from the Even Yekoro, Rabbi Yomin Aryeh HaKohen Weiss, Av based in Chernovitz, printed in Shnas Tarnun Dalet, that the Tanakh, written with such a small ksav that you cannot read it, it's not Kodosh. Can you be noeheg on such a micro ksav minig bezoyen? That is a separate question. And it says even though it has no din ksav, but you should not be noeheg minig bezoyen in such a ksav. Just like the Ramo in Hilchos Tzitzis, in the beginning of Siman Chov Aleph, that even tzitzis that has kedushas mitzvah, you should not be noiheg minig bezoyen. They should not be thrown to the ashpe b'derech bezoyen. B'mokon meguno has to be put in a bag b'derech kovot. And the same thing is with the schach of the sukkah, like the taz that the Mishnah Berurah brings down over there in Sifkot Vov. And the lulav and the esrek and the shofar, once it was used for a mitzvah, you should not be noyek minig bezoyen. So if you read Divrei Torah with a microscope, maybe it has kedusha. The same thing is with a CD. If you use it for Divrei Torah, could be that has kedusha's mitzvah, and it should not be noyek minig bezoyen. In Sefer Zichron LeMoshe brings down that Hagon Miselish, Mechaber Sefer Tzibur HaChaim, went to faher himself by the Chassam Sofer with another bocher who was even smarter than him. But the Chassam Sofer did not take that bocher for a Talmud, because he saw there was a minig bezoyen when he came in and he stepped on the schach without the racheretz. He thought that this bocher has luck in Yireh Shamayim, and he was not mekabel him for a Talmud. In Sefer Yabia Omer brings down that if you look at the money in Eretz Yisrael, there are psukim from Tanakh, from Sefer Yeshaya. The letters are so small that you can only see them with a very powerful magnifying glass. You have to magnify it at least 30 times. And his miracle, like the Shalshen Tshuvas Even Yekoro, in Marshami's Machmer you should put such a ksav of Tanakh printed in very small letters, kis betoch kis. And also in Shalshen Tshuvas Tzitz Eliezer and Ver Moshe speak about it. The same thing if you find a Sefer Torah or the Tefillin Mezuzos, that the letters are split, but the split, the nifsag is so small that it is only nicker when you see it very closely with the chuchis magdeles. magnifying glass. But with the eye in Chodo and Bria, with a good sharp eye, you cannot see that split. The Sefer Torah is still kosher. Similar to this shaila, fish to become kosher has to have kaskasim, scales. What happens if those scales are so small that they're only visible through a microscope, or zechuchis magdeles? In Sefer Tiferes Yisrael in Avodah Zorah, Perek Beis Mishnah Vov, in the Boyas, Sifkot and Gimel brings down, Avoisenu Sipru Lonu, there's a fish called kfape that the scales can only be seen through a microscope or through a strong Zchuchis Magdeles. And this became an issue whether this fish is still kosher or not. Do we follow what the eye sees, or we follow what the Kelim Mikelim Shoinim let the eye see, even though it's not a natural re'iyah? The same shale is, if you have a pegam in a sakin, you cannot use it for shchita. But what happens if that pegam is so small that you can only see it with a microscope? That's nothing. It has to be a pegam that is nirgash with the tzipoiren, not with a microscope. In Shibin Rov, in the first tshuva, in Doiver Meishorim, a Sefer Torah Tefillin Mezuzos have to be written Mukaf Gevil. The entire letter has to be surrounded by cloth, and you cannot have two letters touching each other. If it looks like they are touching, but if you look with a Zchuchit Magdeles, you see there is an afrodo, there is a space between them. Is it kosher the way it is? Or we say, no, since the eye sees a negiah, I don't care that the metzias there's no negiah. The eye sees a negiah. Again, we paskin that we follow the eye. We don't follow the microscope. If it looks like a negiah, we treat it like a negiah, and it's possible until you fix it. The Chayodom brings down a Sefer Habris that in his times they discovered bacteria. And he wants to say that choimetz has bacteria, memelo you're not to eat it, because bacteria is live microorganisms. But the Chayodom says he doesn't understand this Sefer Habris, because the Torah says meferish that a Nozir is the only one that is not allowed to drink choimetz yayin, but everybody else is muted to drink choimetz yayin, and even if it has bacteria. Boyas gave rus tefal pitech bechoimetz, or a chashulchan in Yordea Simen Peidalet Sif Lamed Vov. In water you find chaydakim, microorganism, but since you cannot see it, you may drink it. It's not osur. The entire air is full of microorganisms, and the Torah did not ask for such a thing. The Igros Moshe Yordea Chelek Beisif Kuf Mem Vov Divrei Hamas Chiloma also speaks about it. If that's the case, can you use a microscope to check for chatness? Yes. The microscope is just telling you that this is, in fact, linen. You see the chutim, but you don't know what it is. The microscope is used only to be mevarer what type of material it is. But if that material is so small that you can only see it through a microscope, could be this no problem. If you find very small spots in an esrog, does it pass it? Of course not. It has to be something which is nikar lo enayim, pri eitz hodor, a beautiful fruit with no blemishes. But has to be blemishes that you can only see with your eye and spot it quickly. If such a blemish that you have to be mistakel very strongly, it's not considered a chisoron and pri eitz hodor. Can you use a computer that scans the Sifrei Torah and it finds mistakes that sometimes the Sofrim don't find? Or we say no, if the Sofer did not find it, you're not mechuyev to go and check it with a machine. The answer is no. The problem is that the checkers are not focusing. So you are mechuyev to use all the tatzdeki, all the ways to be able to find the mistakes. Are you mechuyev to measure the tefillin and that should be perfectly square to the fraction of a millimeter? The poskim say no. If it looks that is square, you're not mechuyev to measure. Igros Moshe Yordea Chelek Beis Daf Resh Mem Ches Chelek Gimel Soif Sifkoton Kufchof. And he brings a raya. Chazal say the diagonal of a square is longer than the side by 2/5. If you have a square 5 inches by 5 inches, the diagonal is going to be 7 inches, 2/5 longer than the side. But Toisves in Sukkot of Ches Umed Aleph and Eruvin Daf Nun Zayin Umed Aleph say that it is not exact. So you see, you don't have to be medagdek. You're allowed to run it off. In Medrash Rabbah Parshas Nosoi, The luchos shniyos were nechkak between the words, ben dibur ledibur, pirushim, digdukim. It's much of the Rishonim that kol ha-Torah kula was written between the oisius. Some people have a hobby to write on the shell of an egg, or sometimes they print the price or the quality of the egg on the shell. The shaila is if you're allowed to break this egg open on Shabbos and Yontev, mishum mechikas oisius. The Kaf HaChaim and Siman Shemem Ois Lamed Dalet says the katchila should not break it by the oisius, but if it did break by the oisius, is dover she'enu miskaven is his muter. There was a minig in a few places to be megadol tarnigolim, and the first egg they used to use for asgulo, and they used to write psukim with kemeyos on that egg. Then they used to give the egg for the child to eat it and to be mispalel that he should be at Talmud Chochem. But they had to be makpid that no part of that egg should be missing. He had to eat every single part of the egg besides the shells.